Chapter 46. The Bastion of Saint-Gervais. On arriving at his friends' quarters, D'Artagnan found them assembled in one room. Athos was thinking, Porthos was twisting his mustache, and Aramis was reading his prayers in a charming little book bound in blue velvet. "By my soul, gentlemen," said D'Artagnan, "I hope that what you have to tell me is worth the trouble. Otherwise I should not forgive your having made me dismantle a bastion entirely by myself." "Ah, why were you not there, gentlemen? It was hot work." "We were in another place, where it was by no means cold either," said Porthos, giving his mustache a turn peculiar to himself. "Hush," said Athos. Oh, said D'Artagnan, understanding the slight frown of the Musketeer. "It seems that there is something fresh astir." "Aramis," said Athos, "you breakfasted at the Parapilot Tavern the day before yesterday, I believe?" "Yes." "How are things there?" "Why, I fared but badly myself. It was a fast day, and they had nothing but meat." "What," said Athos, "in a seaport, and no fish?" "They say that the mound which the cardinal is building drives the fish out into the open sea," said Aramis, resuming his pious reading. "But that is not what I wanted to know, Aramis," continued Athos. "Were you free, and did no one disturb you?" "Why, I think that there were not many idlers," replied Aramis. "Yes, in fact, for what you want, Athos, I think we shall do well enough at the Parapilot." "Come, then, let us to the Parapilot," said Athos, "for here the walls are like leaves of paper." D'Artagnan, who was accustomed to his friend's manner, and understood by a word, a gesture, or a look from him the circumstances called for seriousness, took his arm and went out with him without uttering a word. Porthos followed them in conversation with Aramis. On their way they met Grimaud, and Athos beckoned to him to attend them. Grimaud, according to custom, obeyed in silence. The poor fellow had finished by almost forgetting how to speak. When they arrived at the Parapilot, it was 7 in the morning, and the day was just beginning to dawn. The three friends ordered breakfast and entered a room where the landlord assured them they would be not disturbed. The hour was unfortunately ill chosen for a conference. The morning drum had just been beaten, everyone was busy shaking off the sleepiness of night, and to drive away the dampness of the morning air, coming to take a drop at the tavern. Dragoons, Swiss, guards, musketeers, and light cavalry succeeded one another with a rapidity very beneficial to the business of mine host, but very unfavorable to the designs of our four friends, who replied but sullenly to the salutations, toasts, and jests of their companions. "Come," said Athos, "we shall bring some good quarrel on our hands presently, and we do not want that just now. D'Artagnan, tell us about your night's work. We will tell you about ours afterwards." "In fact," said one of the light cavalry, who, whilst rocking himself, held in his hand a glass of brandy which he slowly sipped, "in fact, you were in the trenches, you gentlemen of the guards, and it seems to me that you had a squabble with the Rochefoucauld." D'Artagnan looked at Athos to see whether he ought to answer this intruder who intruded upon the conversation. "Well," said Athos, "did you not hear Monsieur de Busigny, who did the honor to address you? Tell us what took place in the night, as these gentlemen seem desirous to hear it." "Did you not take a bastion?" asked a Swiss who was drinking rum mixed with a glass of beer. "Yes, sir," replied D'Artagnan, bowing. "We had that honor. And also, as you have may heard, we introduced a barrel of powder under one of the angles, which, on exploding, made a very pretty breach, without reckoning that, as the bastion is very old, all the rest of the building is much shaken." "And which bastion is that?" asked a dragoon, who held spitted on his saber a goose which he had brought to be cooked. "The Bastion of Saint-Gervais," replied D'Artagnan, "from behind which the Rochefoucauld annoyed our sappers." "And was it warm work?" "Yes, we lost 5 men, and the Rochefoucauld some 8 or 10. "Balzampleu," said the Swiss, who, in spite of the admirable collection of oaths which the German language possesses, had got the habit of swearing in French. "But it is probable," said the light horseman, "that they will send pioneers to repair the bastion this morning." "Yes, it is probable," said D'Artagnan. "Gentlemen," said Athos, "a wager." "Ah, a wager," said the Swiss. "What is it?" asked the light horseman. "Stop," said the dragoon, laying his saber like a spit on the two great iron dogs which supported the fire of the chimney. "I am in it. A dripping pan here instantly, you noodle of a landlord, that I may not lose one drop of the fat of this estimable bird." "He's right," said the Swiss. "The fat of a goose is very good with sweetmeats." "There," said the dragoon, "and now for the wager. We are listening, Monsieur Athos." "Well, Monsieur de Busigny," said Athos, "I bet you that my three comrades, Messieurs Porthos, Aramis, and D'Artagnan, and myself, will go and breakfast in the Bastion of Saint-Gervais, and that we will stay there for 1 hour by the clock, whatever the enemy may do to dislodge us." Porthos and Aramis looked at one another, for they began to understand. "Why," said D'Artagnan, stooping to Athos's ear, "you are going to get us all killed without mercy." "We shall be more certainly killed if we do not go," replied Athos. "Ah, faith, gentlemen," said Porthos, throwing himself back in his chair and twirling his mustache. "That is a fine wager, I hope." "And I accept it," said Monsieur de Busigny. "Now we must fix the stakes." "You are 4, gentlemen," said Athos, "and we are 4. A dinner for 8. Will that suit you?" "Just the thing," replied Monsieur de Busigny. "Exactly," said the dragoon. "That will do," exclaimed the Swiss. The fourth auditor, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, bowed his head as a sign that he acquiesced to the proposition. "The déjeuner of these gentlemen is ready," broke in the landlord. "Well, then, bring it here," said Athos. The landlord obeyed. Athos called Grimaud, showed him a large basket which was lying in a corner, and made him a sign to wrap up in the napkins all the eatables which he had brought. Grimaud, comprehending at once that they were going to breakfast on the grass, took the basket, packed up the eatables, put in the bottles, and took the basket up in his arms. "But where are you going to eat this breakfast?" said the landlord. "What does it signify to you?" replied Athos, "provided you are paid for it." And he threw 2 pistoles majestically on the table. "Must I give you the change, sir?" said mine host. "No, but add a couple of bottles of champagne, and the balance will pay for the napkins." The landlord had not made quite such a good thing of it as he had first expected, but he recompensed himself for it by palming off on his 4 guests 2 bottles of Anjou wine instead of the 2 bottles of champagne. "Monsieur de Busigny, will you regulate your watch by mine, or permit me to regulate mine by yours?" inquired Athos. "At your pleasure," said the light dragoon, drawing from his fob a very beautiful watch encircled with diamonds. "7:30, added he. 35 after 7, said Athos. "We shall remember that I am 5 minutes in advance, sir." Then, bowing to the astonished party, the 4 young men took the road toward the Bastion of Saint-Gervais, followed by Grimaud, who carried the basket, not knowing where he was going, and from the passive obedience that was habitual to him, not even thinking of inquiring. Whilst they were within the precincts of the camp, the 4 friends did not exchange a word. They were, besides, followed by the curious, who, having heard of the wager, wished to know how they would extricate themselves from the affair. But when once they had got behind the lines of circumvallation, and found themselves in the open country, D'Artagnan, who was entirely ignorant of what they were about, thought it high time to demand some explanation. "And now, my dear Athos," said he, "do me the favor to tell me where we are going." "You can see well enough," replied Athos. "We're going to the Bastion." "But what are we going to do there?" "You know very well we're going to breakfast there." "But why did we not breakfast at the Parapilot?" "Because we have most important things to tell you, and it was impossible to converse for 5 minutes in that tavern, with all those troublesome fellows who come and go and continually accost us. Here, at last," continued Athos, pointing to the Bastion, "no one will come to interrupt us." "It appears to me," said D'Artagnan, with that prudence which was so thoroughly and so naturally united with his extreme courage, "it appears to me that we could have found some retired spot somewhere among the downs on the seashore, where we should have been seen all 4 in council together, so that in a quarter of an hour the cardinal would have been informed by his spies that we were holding a consultation." "Yes," said Aramis, "Athos is right. Anima d'aventure in desertis." "A desert would not have been a bad place," remarked Porthos, "but the difficulty is to find one." There is no desert where a bird could not pass over one's head, or a fish jump from the water, or a rabbit run from her burrow, and I believe that bird, fish, and rabbit are amongst the cardinal's spies. It is much better, therefore, to pursue our enterprise. Besides, we cannot now recede without disgrace. We've made a bet which could not have been foreseen, and of which I defy anyone to guess the true motive. To win it, we must remain an hour in the bastion. Either we shall or shall not be attacked. If we are not, we shall have time to talk, and no one will hear us, for I will answer for it that the walls of this bastion have no ears. If we are attacked, we will talk just the same, and shall, moreover, by defending ourselves, be covered with glory. So you see that everything is favorable to us. Yes, said D'Artagnan, but we shall indubitably be shot. Well, rejoined Athos, but you know very well that the bullets most to be feared are not those of the enemy. Yet it seems to me, said Porthos, that for such an expedition we should have at least brought our muskets. You're a simpleton, friend Porthos. Why should we encumber ourselves with a useless burden? I do not find a good regulation musket with a dozen cartridges and a powder flask useless in front of an enemy. Well, rejoined Athos, did you not hear what D'Artagnan said? And what did D'Artagnan say? Asked Porthos. D'Artagnan says that in last night's attack as many as 8 or 10 Frenchmen were killed, and as many of the enemy. Well, there has not been time to strip them, has there, seeing there was something more urgent to which to attend? Well, we shall find their muskets, powder flasks, and cartridges, and instead of 4 muskets and a dozen balls, we shall have about 15 muskets and 100 rounds of ammunition to fire. Oh, Athos, said Aramis, you are really a great man. Porthos bowed his head in token of acquiescence. D'Artagnan alone did not appear completely convinced. Grimaud unquestionably partook of the young man's incredulity, for, seeing that they continued to march toward the bastion, which he suspected before, he plucked his master by the shirt of his coat. "Where are we going?" he inquired by a sign. Athos pointed to the bastion. "But," said the silent Grimaud, still in the same dialect, "we shall leave our skins there." Athos raised his eyes and his fingers toward heaven. Grimaud set down his basket on the ground and seated himself upon it, shaking his head. Athos took a pistol from his belt, looked at the priming, cocked it, and leveled it at Grimaud's ear. Grimaud found himself raised up upon his legs as if by the force of a spring. Athos then beckoned to him to take up the basket and to march in front. Grimaud obeyed, so that all the poor fellow had gained by this momentary pantomime was that he had been transformed from the rear guard to the advanced guard. Having reached the bastion, the 4 friends looked behind them. More than 300 soldiers of every arm had assembled at the entrance to the camp, and in a separate group they saw Monsieur de Busigny, the dragoon of the Swiss, and the 4th wagerer. Athos took off his hat, raised it on the end of his sword, and waved it in the air. All the spectators returned his salutation, accompanying this act of politeness with a loud hurrah, which reached the ears of the party. After this occurrence, they all 4 disappeared in the bastion, where Grimaud had already preceded them.